Let me tell you something most people will never admit out loud. People don't disrespect you by accident. They don't interrupt you randomly. They don't ignore you unintentionally. They don't cross your boundaries because they didn't know. No, they do it because something in you silently told them it's safe to do so. Not your words, not your achievements, not your intentions, your presence. There is a signal you're sending every second you exist around others. A signal that says either, handle me carefully, or you can get away with anything. And most people, without realizing it, broadcast the second one. You don't lose respect because you lack intelligence. You don't lose respect because you're unsuccessful. You lose it because people can feel your need to be accepted. They sense hesitation. They detect emotional dependence. They read your fear of tension. And the moment they feel that, the balance shifts. This is not motivation. This is not about being positive. This is about power dynamics at a psychological level. And today, you're going to understand how to rebuild your presence into something that cannot be tested, shaken, or controlled. 1. The core of presence, mental stillness. Let's start at the foundation, the place where everything begins. Think carefully. When was the last time you were about to speak? Your mind already forming the sentence, but then you stopped yourself, not because you had nothing to contribute, not because your idea lacked value, but because a small voice in your head whispered, "Wait, how is this going to sound?" So you paused, you adjusted, or worse, you stayed silent. That exact moment, that hesitation, that's where authority breaks. Not loudly, not visibly, but internally, where it matters most. Because power isn't created in the words you speak. It's created in the certainty you carry before those words ever leave your mouth. When your mind is settled, truly settled, everything about you shifts. Your voice naturally slows, not out of effort but out of control. Your tone becomes firm, not aggressive but grounded. Your words stop spilling out and start landing with intention. Even your pauses begin to carry weight. And your silence, it stops being empty and starts becoming presence. People pick up on this instantly. Even if they don't consciously understand it, they feel it. There's something different about you, something composed, something difficult to interrupt, difficult to ignore. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people destroy this power long before anyone else gets the chance to. They sabotage themselves internally. They enter spaces already questioning their position. Do I even belong here? Am I saying the right thing? What are they thinking about me right now? They speak and immediately scan faces for approval. They act and then mentally replay every reaction they receive. They make decisions, but hesitate right after making them. This constant need for validation leaks through in subtle ways, and people notice, not consciously, but instinctively, because human beings are wired to detect uncertainty, not because people are malicious, but because instability invites testing. It's natural. If someone appears unsure, others will push limits. They'll interrupt, they'll challenge, they'll take more space. But when someone appears grounded, completely settled in themselves, the dynamic shifts. People adjust. They listen more carefully. They speak more precisely. They think before crossing lines. So understand this principle clearly. Never project your doubt outward. You're allowed to question yourself internally. That's part of being human. Growth requires uncertainty. But externally, you move with clarity. Even when you don't have all the answers. Even when the situation isn't perfect. Even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. You still move. You decide, and you commit to that decision in the moment. You don't ramble to fill silence. You don't over-explain to justify your position. You don't pause mid-action to seek reassurance from others. You trust your direction, fully, visibly, and without apology. Because here's what happens the moment you stop second-guessing yourself out loud. The room changes. People stop questioning you. They stop probing for weakness. They stop trying to read hesitation, not because you became perfect, but because you became decisive. And decisiveness, even when imperfect, is always more powerful than visible doubt. The less you look for approval, the less others feel the need to withhold it, and the moment you stop asking for permission, even silently, is the moment your presence begins to carry real weight. 2. Controlled expression. The power of concealment. Most people leak everything. Their emotions are visible. Their reactions are immediate. Their thoughts are transparent, and that makes them predictable. Predictability is weakness, because once someone understands how you react, they understand how to influence you. Think about the last time someone provoked you, and you responded emotionally. What did they gain? A blueprint. They learned exactly what triggers you, exactly how far they can go, and next time, they'll go further. That's why controlled expression is essential. You're not suppressing emotion. You're choosing its timing and visibility. There's a difference. You feel everything but reveal selectively. Your tone remains even. Your posture stays composed. Your face doesn't broadcast your internal state. And suddenly, people can't read you. And when people can't read you, they hesitate. That hesitation becomes your advantage. You don't need to share every thought. You don't need to explain every decision. Your internal world is not public property. Let people wonder, because uncertainty about you creates caution around you. 3. Silent consequences. The language of power. You don't need to intimidate people loudly. In fact, loudness is often compensation. Real authority is subtle. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't overreact. It simply establishes one thing: disrespect has a cost. But here's where most people fail. They respond emotionally. They argue. They defend. They escalate. And that makes them easier to control, because emotional reactions are predictable. But calm withdrawal? That's different. When someone disrespects you, and you don't react, but instead become distant, colder, less available, it creates discomfort, because now they don't know where they stand. They don't know if they crossed a line permanently. They don't know what comes next. That uncertainty is far more powerful than aggression. So instead of matching energy, you reduce access. You don't validate disrespect with engagement. You acknowledge it silently and adjust your behavior, and that adjustment becomes the message. 4. Emotional independence, the inner discipline. If your emotions dictate your actions, then you're not in control of your life. You might think you are. You might feel like you're making choices, but in reality, you're reacting. And there's a difference. Most people move through life like reactive systems. Something good happens, they rise instantly. Someone praises them, they feel validated, energized, confident. But the moment criticism appears, they collapse, their energy drops, their confidence shakes, their focus disappears. One positive moment lifts them to the top. One negative moment brings them crashing down. A productive morning makes them feel unstoppable. A difficult afternoon makes them question everything. That's not stability, that's dependency. It means your internal state is being controlled by external triggers. It means your mood, your decisions, and your behavior are constantly being dictated by circumstances you don't control. And anything that controls you owns you. Real power begins the moment that stops. It begins when your internal state is no longer tied to what's happening around you. Not because you stop feeling, but because you stop being ruled by what you feel. You still experience emotions. You feel anger, but you don't let it speak for you. You feel pressure, but you don't let it rush your decisions. You feel anxiety, but you don't let it dictate your next move. You notice jealousy, but you don't let it define your identity. You become aware of these emotions without becoming consumed by them. That awareness creates distance, and that distance changes everything, because between what happens to you and how you respond to it, there is a gap. Most people close that gap instantly with reaction. But when you train yourself to pause, to observe, to remain still for just a moment longer, that gap expands. And inside that space, you gain control, you gain clarity, you gain choice. Now you're no longer reacting automatically. You're deciding deliberately. While others are driven by impulse, you're guided by intention. While they defend their ego, you protect your position. While they get caught in emotional waves, you stay grounded and think ahead. And that difference, subtle but powerful, is what separates those who are led from those who lead. Because leaders don't eliminate emotion, they master their relationship with it. 5. Strategic awareness, reading the room. Most people are so focused on being heard that they completely miss what's happening around them. They are waiting for their turn to speak, rehearsing their next sentence, thinking about how they sound, how they appear, how they'll be perceived. And in doing so, they lose the most valuable advantage in any interaction: awareness. Because real influence doesn't come from speaking more. It doesn't come from dominating conversations or overpowering voices. It comes from understanding more than everyone else in the room. When you slow down and truly pay attention, you begin to notice things others overlook: subtle shifts in tone, micro-expressions, moments of hesitation, changes in energy. You start to see patterns in behavior. You recognize who seeks validation, who avoids confrontation, who needs control, who fears judgment. You notice insecurities hidden behind confidence, motivations disguised as opinions, weaknesses masked as strengths. You begin to see what people don't say, what they avoid talking about, what they deflect, what they exaggerate to compensate, what they carefully hide beneath the surface. And this kind of awareness, it's powerful, not because it gives you control over others in a manipulative way, but because it allows you to position yourself intelligently. You stop speaking randomly. You stop trying to impress everyone. Instead, you adapt. You align your communication with what matters to them. You speak in a way that resonates with their priorities. You frame your ideas so they naturally make sense from their perspective. You're no longer guessing. You're targeting. And because of that, your words carry more weight, even when you say less. You don't need to convince aggressively. You don't need to push your point, because it already fits into the framework of how they think. And that's when something shifts. You're no longer trying to force influence. You're not chasing agreement or attention. You're guiding perception, quietly, subtly, effectively. While others are busy trying to be heard, you're becoming impossible to ignore. 6. Boundaries, the non-negotiable line. Every time you tolerate behavior that disrespects you, you lower your own value. Not in theory, in practice. People don't respect what is always available. They respect what has limits. Boundaries are not explanations. They are actions. You don't argue about them. You enforce them. If someone repeatedly wastes your time, you stop investing in them. If someone crosses a line, you reduce access. No long speeches, no emotional debates, just adjustment, and people will notice. Because consistency in boundaries forces others to either respect them or lose you. 7. Withdrawal, the most underestimated move. Sometimes the strongest move is not confrontation, it's absence. Not dramatic absence, not announced departure, just reduced presence. When you stop giving attention, stop initiating, stop being available, people feel it. Because what was once constant is now uncertain, and uncertainty creates value. But here's the key. You don't withdraw as a tactic to get attention. You withdraw because your energy deserves better placement. And if someone realizes your value after your absence, they'll adjust. If not, you've already moved on. Either way, you win. 8. The final state, untouchable presence. When all these elements combine, internal certainty, controlled emotion, silent consequences, strategic awareness, firm boundaries, selective absence, something changes. You stop chasing respect and start embodying it. You don't react to everything. You don't explain yourself constantly. You don't need validation. And people feel that. They adjust their tone. They measure their words. They think before testing you. Not because you demanded it, but because your presence requires it. Closing. Here's the truth most people avoid. The world doesn't reward effort alone. It responds to perception. Not fairness, not intention, perception. And your presence shapes that perception every second. So stop trying to convince people of your value. Start becoming someone whose value doesn't need explanation. Because in a world full of noise, the calm, controlled, self-contained individual becomes impossible to ignore and even harder to challenge.